Insane Karen calls 911 for using my own pool. Claims I'm a burglar. Sometimes, you make a decision that feels so perfectly aligned it's as if the universe is giving you a little nod of approval. That's exactly how it felt when Melissa and I first laid eyes on the house. It was the culmination of years of planning, saving, and dreaming. A fresh start in a place we could finally call our own. The kind of place where we could breathe, grow, and maybe even build a family someday. Of course, at the time, we didn't know that our new life would come with complications. Or that one of those complications would have a name. Christine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Melissa and I spent most of our 20s in the heart of Manchester, soaking up everything the city had to offer. The energy was contagious, the nightlife unbeatable, and there was always something happening. For a while, it was perfect for us. We had this little apartment in the northern quarter, which, while not exactly luxurious, felt like our cozy haven in the middle of the buzz. It was one of those places where you could reach out from the kitchen and touch the couch. Not ideal, but we made it work. As the years rolled on, though, the charm started to wear thin. The small space began to feel suffocating, and the constant noise, whether it was late-night football chants or drunken arguments echoing down the street, was no longer something we could laugh off. We were growing up, and the city, for all its vibrancy, was starting to feel like a younger person's playground. It didn't help that renting felt like throwing money into a pit. Every month, the landlord would pocket a chunk of our hard-earned salaries, and we'd be left wondering how we'd ever get ahead. So we made a pact. No unnecessary splurges, no extravagant holidays, and no Uber Eats unless it was a genuine emergency. Every spare penny went into a savings account labeled, somewhat optimistically, house fund. We knew what we wanted. A home with space, actual tangible space. Somewhere with a garden, where we could sit with a glass of wine in the evenings or, someday, watch our kids run around. Maybe even room for a dog, though Melissa and I still debate whether we're cat or dog people. It didn't need to be fancy, just ours. After months of scrolling through property websites, we landed on Stockport. It wasn't too far from Manchester, which made commuting feasible, but it had a slower, more relaxed vibe. It felt like a place where we could actually exhale. The housing market there wasn't exactly kind, but with some creative budgeting and a little luck, we managed to carve out a slim set of options. Then we found the house. I still remember how it felt walking into the viewing. A 3-bedroom, semi-detached house with bay windows, warm wooden floors, and a garden that was overgrown but full of potential. It wasn't huge, but it had character. Little quirks like an arched doorway between the living and dining rooms that Melissa fell in love with immediately. And then there was the pool. A swimming pool wasn't even on our radar when we started house hunting. In fact, it felt a bit ridiculous when we first saw it. A pool? In Stockport? But there it was, tucked into the back garden like a hidden treasure. It wasn't Olympic-sized or anything, but it was surprisingly well-maintained. The idea of cooling off on a hot day or hosting friends for a poolside barbecue was all it took to win us over. Of course, it came with a catch, the price. The pool pushed the property just beyond our initial budget. We spent days running the numbers, agonizing over whether we could afford it without completely chaining ourselves to our jobs. In the end, the dream was too good to pass up. We stretched the mortgage, made peace with the tighter budget, and crossed our fingers. 2 months later, after countless phone calls with solicitors, sleepless nights, and one near meltdown over a missing document, the keys were ours. The move itself was chaotic, as moves always are. Between arguing over where the sofa should go and cursing every box we'd overpacked, it was exhausting. But the house was ours. Over the first 2 weeks, we chipped away at making it feel like home. Painting walls, putting up shelves, and planning out bigger projects. The neighborhood seemed nice enough. It wasn't overly chatty, but we got a few polite waves and welcome smiles from neighbors as we carried furniture in and out. We figured we'd introduce ourselves properly once we'd caught our breath. And then the heat wave hit. I'll never forget that week. Mid-June, and the temperatures shot up to 30 degrees Celsius. Practically apocalyptic for England. Our house, built long before the days of central air, turned into an oven. Fans did little more than blow hot air around, and the nights were impossible to sleep through. By day 3, Melissa had had enough. "Why are we sweating like this when we have a pool?" she said, tossing her hair up in frustration. I didn't need convincing. Within minutes, we were in our swimsuits, lounging in the cool water with cold drinks in hand. It was the first time we'd slowed down since moving in, and it felt like pure bliss. Melissa floated on her back, eyes closed, while I stretched out on a pool float, letting the tension of the past few weeks drift away. "This is it," she said, her voice dreamy. "This is why we worked so hard. Our own little slice of paradise." I smiled, feeling the same way. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was ours. That's when we heard the creak of the garden gate. I thought maybe it was the wind or a curious neighbor stopping by to say hello. But when I looked toward the gate, I saw a woman standing there, hand on the latch like she owned the place. She looked to be in her 50s with short, overly bleached hair and sunglasses perched on her nose. She wore a tight tank top and denim shorts that seemed just a little too young for her, and her stance radiated the kind of confidence that made me instinctively tense up. Melissa was the first to speak. "Oh, hello," she said, sitting up in the water. The woman didn't answer. She walked straight into our garden and planted herself by the edge of the pool, hands on her hips. "What do you think you're doing?" Melissa and I exchanged a glance. "Sorry," I said, unsure if I'd misheard her. "You're in my pool," the woman said, her tone sharp. I blinked. No, this is our pool. We live here." The woman let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. This pool has been mine for years. You have no right to be here." Now, I know I should have handled this more calmly, but in the moment, I was too stunned to do much besides stare. "We bought this house," I said, gesturing around, 2 weeks ago. The pool is part of the property." Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked even more annoyed. "I don't care what you think you bought. That pool is mine. You need to leave." Melissa, ever the practical one, excused herself to grab towels and some paperwork while I stayed in the water, trying to keep the situation from spiraling further. "Look," I said, doing my best to stay calm, "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We just moved in. But this is our property now." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't patronize me. I've lived next door for 15 years. That pool has always been on my property." Now I was confused. Either she was lying or she genuinely believed what she was saying. "With all due respect," I said, "I don't know what arrangement you think you had with the previous owners, but this pool was sold to us as part of the house." Melissa returned then, holding a folder of documents. "Here," she said, handing the woman a page from the deeds. "This outlines the property lines, including the pool. It's ours." Christine, as we later learned her name, didn't even glance at it. She just waved her hand dismissively. "I've seen this scam before. You print off a few fake papers and think you can steal someone's property? Pathetic." For a moment, I was at a loss for words. What would we even gain from faking buying a house? I asked, but Christine wasn't interested in logic. "You'll be hearing from my solicitor," she said, turning to leave. "Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts." And with that, she stormed out, leaving the gate swinging behind her. Melissa and I stared after her, speechless. Who was this woman? Why was she so convinced the pool was hers? We didn't have answers then, but one thing was clear. Christine wasn't going to let this go. We didn't have to wait long to find out just how far Christine was willing to go. If her bizarre claim over our pool wasn't enough to make us question her sanity, what happened next left no doubt. She was determined to make our lives hell. The heat wave dragged on, and while the pool would have been the perfect escape, Melissa and I couldn't bring ourselves to use it. Every time we looked at the shimmering water, we half expected Christine to burst through the garden gate again, shouting about her property. Instead, we spent the next few days indoors trying to shake off the encounter. "I don't get it," Melissa said one evening, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her laptop open. "The property lines on the deed are clear. There's no way the pool belongs to her." "I know," I replied, staring blankly at the ceiling. "But logic doesn't seem to matter to her. What's worse is she actually believes she's in the right." Melissa let out a frustrated sigh. Do you think we should talk to her? Maybe if we explain things again, she'll back off. I shook my head. I don't think talking is going to help. She's convinced. Honestly, I think she's waiting for us to mess up so she can swoop in and, I don't know, prove her point somehow. Neither of us realized how accurate that prediction would turn out to be. It happened a few days later. Melissa was working from home, her laptop propped up on the dining table, while I was tinkering with some minor repairs in the kitchen. The faint hum of summer filled the air, distant lawnmowers, birdsong, and the occasional car passing by. Then came the unmistakable sound of the garden gate creaking open. Melissa froze, her eyes snapping up from her screen. "Did you hear that?" Before I could respond, there was a loud, theatrical gasp, followed by the shrill voice we both dreaded. "I knew it. I knew you'd be back. Sneaking around." I stepped into the hallway just as Melissa rushed toward the back door. There, standing in our garden with a hand on her hip and a phone in her other hand, was Christine. She looked furious, more so than the first time, and her expression twisted into something like triumph when she saw us. "What are you doing here?" Melissa asked, her voice tight. Christine ignored the question. Instead, she raised her phone high, as if it were some sort of weapon, and announced loudly, "You've left me no choice. I'm calling the police." "Wait, what?" I said, stepping forward. "Christine, stop." But she was already dialing. It would have been almost comical if it wasn't happening to us. Christine pressed her phone to her ear, her voice rising with each word. "Yes. Hello? I need the police. There are intruders in my house." She paused, her eyes darting toward us as if to gauge our reaction. "Yes, they're dangerous. I don't feel safe." I stood there, stunned, while Melissa whispered, "Is this really happening?" Christine continued, pacing dramatically across the garden. "Yes, they're still here. They're pretending it's their house. They've even got fake documents. Oh, it's horrible. Please, send someone quickly." I tried to reason with her, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "Christine, stop this. You know this isn't your house. We've been over this already." She pointed a finger at me, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't you dare speak to me, you thief. The police will deal with you soon enough." Melissa grabbed my arm and pulled me back toward the house. "We should go inside," she said quietly. Reluctantly, I followed her, locking the door behind us. Christine remained in the garden, pacing and muttering into her phone, like she'd just caught a pair of international criminals. From the living room window, we watched her. She was walking in circles now, occasionally glancing toward the house with a smug look. "What's her plan?" Melissa asked, half laughing at the absurdity of it all. "Does she think the police are just going to arrest us for living in our own home?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was wait and hope that the authorities would see reason. About 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Christine practically threw herself at them as they stepped into the garden, waving her arms and launching into a dramatic retelling of her version of events. "Thank God you're here," she cried. "Those 2. They broke into my house. They're squatting, and they won't leave." Melissa and I stepped outside cautiously, our hands visible and our demeanors calm. The last thing we needed was for this situation to spiral even further out of control. "Officers," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is our house. We purchased it 2 months ago. I can show you the paperwork." Christine immediately cut me off. "Don't believe them. They're liars. They've probably printed fake documents to trick everyone." One of the officers raised a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, we'll handle this. Please let them speak." I handed over a folder containing the deed, the purchase agreement, and our ID cards. The officers took their time reviewing everything, flipping through pages and cross-checking details. Meanwhile, Christine stood off to the side, muttering under her breath about fraud and conspiracies. When the officers finally looked up, their verdict was clear. "This appears to be in order," the officer said, turning to Christine. "Ma'am, they have provided proof of ownership. This is their property." Christine's face turned a deep shade of red. "That's ridiculous. It's all fake. I told you they're scammers." The second officer, a younger woman, stepped forward. We've thoroughly reviewed the documents. They're legitimate. You need to leave these people alone. Christine wasn't having it. I won't stand for this. I'll sue them. I'll sue you. You're all incompetent. The officers exchanged a weary glance before addressing her again. Ma'am, if you continue to harass them, we'll have to take further action. Do you understand? Christine glared at them, then at us. This isn't over, she hissed. You'll regret this. All of you. And with that, she stormed out of the garden, slamming the gate behind her. The fallout from that incident left Melissa and me reeling. For the next few days, we were on edge, jumping at every sound and constantly checking the garden to make sure Christine wasn't lurking nearby. The stress began to take its toll, leaving us exhausted and irritable. I can't believe this is our life now, Melissa said one evening, her voice heavy with frustration. We just wanted a home. Instead, we've got her. I know, I replied, running a hand through my hair, but we can't let her win. We have every right to be here. Still, her threats lingered in the back of our minds. What if she really did sue us? Could she drag us into a lengthy, expensive legal battle? The thought of losing everything we'd worked so hard for was almost too much to bear. At the suggestion of a friend, we decided to consult a lawyer. The initial consultation was reassuring. Our lawyer confirmed that we were well within our rights to send Christine a cease and desist letter. We need to make it clear, the lawyer said, that any further harassment from her will have legal consequences. The letter was sent the next day. It was firm but fair, outlining the incidents so far and warning Christine to leave us alone. For a while, it seemed to work. Christine went quiet after receiving the letter. There were no more surprise visits, no calls to the police, no angry shouting matches over the garden fence. It was almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. Melissa and I tried to move on, but the paranoia lingered. Melissa called it the Christine effect. Even in her absence, she still felt like a presence in our lives. Every time the garden gate creaked or a car slowed down near the house, we'd tense up, half expecting her to reappear. Despite her lack of action, there was no denying the toll she'd taken on our peace of mind. Still, life had to go on, and a neighborhood council meeting was just the thing to distract us, or so we thought. The meeting was held in a small community hall just a few streets over, a modest space that smelled faintly of floor polish and instant coffee. It was our first time attending, and Melissa thought it would be a good opportunity to meet more of our neighbors and start integrating into the community. The turnout was better than I'd expected. Around 20 people, all crammed into fold-out chairs that creaked with every movement. We recognized a few familiar faces from casual waves during our move-in process. Everyone seemed friendly enough, though the chatter was subdued, as if waiting for something to break the surface. The meeting kicked off with the usual topics: updates on the local park, a discussion about upcoming roadworks, and a mild debate over whether the Christmas lights budget was excessive. It was all very normal until one man raised his hand and said, "I don't see Christine here tonight. Is she still around?" The room shifted. People exchanged glances, and a murmur rippled through the group. It wasn't until a middle-aged woman with a kind face spoke up that we began to piece together the larger picture. "Christine," she said with a dry chuckle. "Of course, she's not here. Probably off somewhere accusing someone of something." Melissa perked up at the mention of Christine's name, and before I could stop her, she raised her hand. "Sorry, Christine? Do you mean Christine who lives next door to us?" All eyes turned to us. There was a beat of silence before the woman nodded. "You're her new neighbors, aren't you?" "We are," Melissa said cautiously. Another neighbor chimed in, his tone laced with sympathy. "Oh, love, I'm so sorry. Has she started with you already?" Melissa hesitated, then decided to lay it all out. She told them about the pool incident, the false police report, and the general chaos Christine had brought into our lives. As she spoke, the room's reaction shifted from quiet understanding to outright disbelief. When she finished, the woman who'd first spoken let out a low whistle. "You poor things. She's been pulling stunts like this for years." Over the next hour, we learned just how deep Christine's behavior went. Apparently, she had a history of terrorizing the neighborhood. One man recounted how she'd accused his teenage son of vandalizing her car, a claim disproven by security camera footage showing Christine herself damaging the vehicle. Another neighbor shared how Christine had once barged into their garden during a barbecue, declaring the smell of the grill a personal attack on her allergies. The stories ranged from ridiculous to downright malicious. By the time the meeting wrapped up, Melissa and I were both stunned and oddly relieved. It wasn't just us. Christine was a problem for everyone. As we left the hall, several neighbors approached us, offering support and solidarity. "If you need witnesses for anything," one man said, clapping me on the shoulder, "we've got you." Melissa and I walked home that night feeling a renewed sense of resolve. Christine might have been a thorn in the side of the entire neighborhood, but this time, she'd picked the wrong fight. With the support of our neighbors, we decided to take legal action. It wasn't an easy decision. Lawsuits are expensive, and even though Christine had already caused us enough grief, the thought of dragging this out further was exhausting. But as Melissa put it, if we don't stand up to her, she'll just keep doing this, to us, to everyone. We consulted our lawyer again, who agreed that we had a strong case. The charges we filed were serious: filing a false police report, criminal trespass, perjury. The neighbors were true to their word. Several of them provided written statements and agreed to testify if needed. Their accounts painted a consistent picture of Christine as an entitled, disruptive presence who had been causing problems for years. The trial itself was surreal. Christine arrived dressed as though she were attending a garden party. Large sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and an expression of smug confidence. She didn't look at us once, instead directing all her attention toward the judge, as if she thought charm alone would win her case. Her defense was as chaotic as expected. She claimed that the pool had always been hers, that the previous owners had gifted it to her verbally, and that Melissa and I were con artists who had somehow duped the entire property market. The judge, to their credit, listened patiently before calling her out. "Ms. Christine," they said, "I see no evidence to support your claims. The deeds, witness statements, and police reports all contradict your account." One by one, our neighbors took the stand. Their testimonies were clear, concise, and damning. They painted a picture of Christine as a habitual liar who thrived on conflict, her stories falling apart under scrutiny. The more they spoke, the more flustered Christine became. She interrupted repeatedly, earning several warnings from the judge, and at one point, she let out a loud, exasperated sigh that echoed through the courtroom. By the time it was our turn to testify, the outcome felt like a foregone conclusion. We laid out our side of the story calmly, presenting every piece of evidence we had. Christine glared daggers at us the entire time, but we refused to be rattled. The trial concluded swiftly. The judge found Christine guilty on all charges. Her sentence was appropriately humiliating: a £5,000 fine for damages and legal fees, 80 hours of community service, a stern warning that any further harassment would result in harsher penalties. As the verdict was read, Christine's face turned a deep shade of red. She muttered something under her breath, but the judge silenced her with a sharp look. When it was over, Melissa and I walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter than we had in months. The relief that followed was overwhelming. For the first time since moving in, Melissa and I could relax. We started using the pool again, laughing about how absurd the whole ordeal had been. Our neighbors rallied around us, inviting us to gatherings and welcoming us into the community with open arms. One evening, as we sat by the pool with a glass of wine each, Melissa turned to me and said, "You know, as horrible as this was, it's kind of amazing how it brought everyone together." I nodded, watching the sun set over the garden. And for the first time in a long time, we felt at peace.